Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to the award-winning Serious Privacy podcast sponsored by TrustArc. Please welcome your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
So it's not every day that we have a head of state joining us for the podcast, but today for our recording on the 1st of April 2026, we are very happy to welcome Simon Pillinger to the show, the first president of the People's Republic of North Oxfordshire. You may also know Simon from the comedy clips he posts on LinkedIn about information governance and data protection, but he is also a very serious data protection and privacy professional with extensive experience in healthcare and pastoral work. So we'll see if today will lead to a serious conversation or not. With Kay joining and the recording date, I'm a little doubtful. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to the April Fool's production of Serious Privacy.
Did I now make you crack up during the introduction for the very first time?
Gotta say, do we really have Simon here, or do we just have his digital self? Okay.
No, it's the real Simon, the voice for radio. It's based for radio. Oh, your grief. Yeah, I'm here.
We're used to it. We're used to it. Don't worry. All right. Are we ready for the unexpected question?
Of course not.
Nobody's ever ready, especially this year, because I have ramped them up. Are you ready for this? What is your favorite cuss word substitute?
Oh, I'm a big fan of the fudge, particularly mother fudging. It's just the wonderful way, or the wonderful. Yeah, I put kids around. I want to say something under my breath, then I just say, yeah.
Ralph?
I'll go back to my roots with a good old-fashioned feck.
I don't replace anything. I just speak the blunt truth, how harsh it may seem.
Oh, I've never heard you use any.
I don't have children, so I don't care.
And he talks to me all the time, so he really doesn't care. No, for me, I think most people that know me know that there are certain cuss words I've never actually said. Closest I get to one of them is flipping. But my favorite one, I guess that comes to mind lately, I use all the time, good googly moo. I don't know if that's excitement or a cuss word, frankly. But the other one that I use that people call me on, and I'll say poopy.
Poopy.
And they're like, what? I'm like, poopy.
You do know Simon could have the distinction of being the first Serious Privacy podcast to have the explicit label put on the podcast. That would be quite something.
No, it's not. It's not. We actually already have one.
Well, tell you what.
Explicit, but this won't be explicit because y'all aren't actually saying the cuss words.
Oh, it can get worse.
Good moo. Yeah. And poopy. Yeah, there we go. All right.
Yeah. So Simon, before we come to you, I think we need to turn to Ralph first because of an announcement he made on Monday. So it's not an April Fool's. Ralph, for those who missed the press release, what did you announce?
I was actually made to do a press release by Paul. But no, for those people that don't know, and I think Kay and I discussed it on a previous podcast as well, we are aligning our brands. We have a brand agreement. And though Serious Privacy Netherlands, Serious Privacy US, and Serious Privacy UK Limited exists as separate companies, we have aligned the brands, and Rainbow Consulting, my previous business, is now passed away into the night. And the sweet release of Into the Void, and now heading forwards. And from this moment onwards, hence she'll be known as Serious Privacy Limited, as Kay and Paul have very kindly allowed me to use their brand going forwards as we take our next steps on the road to global domination.
Absolutely. So the
class.
rainbow has been replaced by magenta and dark blue.
Magenta and dark blue. Go and have a look at the new website, www.seriousprivacy.co.uk, where there are links to the podcast, of course. And if you look carefully, you might see another surprise on the tabs as well of a future project that might be launching very shortly. But enough about me. We need to turn to
Enough
Simon.
about Ralph.
Yeah. We need to turn to Simon. Simon, I think the first question we always ask people is, how the heck did you get into this? That's another good replacement word. How the heck did you get into this weird and wonderful world that we call data protection? How did your career end up to raise to these heights that the rest of us can only dream of?
So I'm a massive history nerd by background. So naturally, I did a degree in archaeology and decided after 3 years of doing archaeology, I didn't want to work in archaeology because I'm both averse to having dirt under my fingernails and poverty. It's not a profession that pays well. So I got a job in the church.
And you didn't know that before you went to university?
No, because everyone that goes to archaeology at university thinks it's glamorous. I think it is. There is
It's
a kind of
Indiana
like,
Jones.
there's a coolness to it, yeah. But then you realise that actually what you're doing is just spending half of your summer sat on some begotten corner of a Welsh or Scottish peninsula drinking. You did spend a lot of time drinking in archaeology, I will say. Yeah, that's quite normal. So it's less Indiana Jones and more AA meetings. After I then went to go work for a church in Oxford for 2.5 years, and after realising that I was even less suited to that job than I was to archaeology, I went to go work in the NHS. My wife's a midwife, still is.
Nice.
And I went to go work for a patient experience team, get some real job experience. And actually, it transpired that I wasn't completely thick. So they kept people saying, we'd like to come and work in this team, we'd like to come and work in this team. And then having spent about 2.5 years working in patient experience and complaints, led their kind of frontline, what they call the PALS team, patient advice and liaison service, just frontline complaints. Great, you get to go and see people on the wards, listen to them, hear their stories. It was wonderful. Someone in IG asked if I'd be interested in a role that was coming up. And there's a chap called Tom's Mansfield, people may know him affectionately as Tesco Tom, was leaving eventually to go on to Tesco. And would I be interested? And I thought, yeah, why not? Because we'd talked, obviously we'd have confidentiality complaints, so I knew the team reasonably well. Got the job somehow. And people say people fall into data protection. Mine was more like putting your foot into a puddle that you suddenly realise as soon as you put your foot in that the puddle is far deeper than you realise. And then the water achieves its hydrostatic equilibrium. And you've got to really stop your foot. And you've got to make a decision of whether you go home or not, or whether you just put up with it. And I think I put up with IG for a while, data protection, confidentiality, all the that jazz. And then I had the fortune to go and work for a residential care company. And about 12 months later, we have this kind of big disease thing hit the world. Pandemic, that was it. And so that was a really interesting, that was my first DPO job. That was my first chance to look at kind of deploying technologies in really fast settings. So people talk about fast practice. You don't get
the lost years.
Yeah. And it was the point of kind of all of the records are paper. Everything's paper. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. You're then trying to put in technologies at pace to help people say goodbye. And there was nothing more heart-wrenching than, it was really good. This is my Paul Breitbart memory, I think, where I was trying to do these assessments of whether the technology was safe. And I kind of just went, you know what, there's a kind of a bigger bit than the data protection, which is there's a small security risk here if we don't get this 100% right. But if we don't push this through, someone's not going to get to say goodbye to their mum or their dad because care homes got hammered in the pandemic in the UK. I think the organisation I was working with lost about 10% of its 3,000 residents within the first 4 months or so. And that was not
heartbreaking.
And it wasn't spread across the care homes evenly. It was, you get a patient into a care home with COVID and you can say goodbye to quite a few people. So anyway, quite emotional. And then went to go and work for a wonderful company called Career Health, which works in mental health research and works with NHS Trust. So I've spent my career in and around healthcare and life sciences and pharma, and then had the opportunity really to spin up Pillinger Privacy, which began in January last year, but didn't become my full-time job properly until kind of April. So we just kind of worked about a year. of doing it, which has been an amazing experience as well.
Congratulate.
Yeah, it wasn't my idea to call it Pillinger Privacy. It was Mrs. Pillinger's idea to call it Pillinger Privacy. And annoyingly, as with almost everything, she was absolutely bang on the money of it being a good brand. I didn't want to call it Rax. It's a little bit ostentatious to put your own name on the label, but hey, it worked. So yeah, that's a very slimmed down positive history of how I got here.
I love it. I'm going to speak to the last thing you said. I absolutely love putting my name on everything. Royal everywhere, right?
You should get one of those little press stamps. The other ones that used to have like a confidential date and just go around. Next time we go to an event, just people's hands. Okay, Royal.
I have told them that at events we need to give away merch of a little rubber stamp that says, I object, Article 22.
I do have a rubber stamp called This Paper Does Not Exist. I bought it from the Spy store in D.C., the Spy Museum, whatever, but it says this paper does not exist. And oh my God, I used that all over the place, especially when I was working in healthcare as the privacy and security officer. Oh yeah, every piece of paper across my desk does not exist, does not exist. But speaking of paper, Simon, I actually had a good code. Every year I chose a color of folders, yellow folders, pink folders, blue folders, whatever. Everything that was paper that went into a folder, it was very easy for me when I walked away from my desk, either temporarily or at the end of the day, to see if there were any blue folders or yellow folders, whatever they were, open on my desk. It was a visual, and the paper was printed out on that color too, to match the folder. So if there was anything blue on my desk, then I knew that there was confidential data out there aware. So it was a code for me to work by for paper.
Speaking of very early days in healthcare, one of my first audits that I did in data protection was at a local GP's doctor's surgery. We had to pull up the very elderly receptionist because she had organized everybody's files and folders into blue, pink, and orange. Not quite certain.
Oh boy, that takes us back, doesn't it? That takes us back.
Yes, indeed. Simon, these days I guess you're best known for your comedy skits, so perhaps you could tell us how they came about, and this does lead us on to a wider theme, I guess, of we can be seen as quite po-faced in the industry. How can humour help?
Look, I think that the group noun for a group of DPOs is a therapy, and I think the reality is the job's really frustrating, and if there's frustration, there's humour. And I had, when I was in complaints, so the complaints manager had this great attitude, which is, are you going to laugh or cry about something? And my approach is, I'm going to laugh. And I love laughter. I love comedy, always have done. And frankly, the person I enjoy laughing at the most is myself, because we're human beings. We do really silly things.
Right.
And it occurred to me one day as I was just going through kind of reels on Facebook and going there, yeah, and TikTok and all the reels, all of that kind of culture has done a great amount for democratizing comedy. Because the ability to do, people like that, Britain's got a great kind of sketch show history, but there's a really good culture now where people can create their own comedy relatively low effort.
Yeah.
Compared to, don't a huge budget or anything to do it, you see their time and know-how. And I thought, there's nothing really like that on LinkedIn, so why don't I just try it? And the first one I did, I absolutely agonized over. I thought, this is either going to be reasonably good or it's going to absolutely bomb and fall through the floor. Yeah, and then, but there's also a point, if you don't try it, you never know, right? So I put that together, and a lot of the humour that I put into these is based on the fact that we do some really, as an industry and as individuals, some really stupid things. And all of this was based on DPIA templates that were like 6,000. I came across one that had about 6,000 words for explanatory text, and I just thought, who in their right mind would want to do that? And so then I have a little kind of thing on the back of my notebook that says skit ideas. It doesn't say skit ideas because I can't write. It actually says something else that looks like skit ideas but isn't. And it just gets things written down there. I was about 3 months into the NHS where I realised that your handwriting as like a doctor was not the compliment that I'd been taking it for. And so there have been things that I haven't published. There have been a couple of things where I try and keep them kind of industry centric. There have been a couple that have into the more political, and I don't post those. I don't record those. So that's where it came from.
That's going to be good therapy to get them out, to record them and get them out.
Yeah, it's really therapeutic. up until the point when you can't quite get it the way that you want it to be. And then you're trying to write something, you can't find an ending for it. Then it becomes really frustrating. You just have to leave it and get on with it. And I started to do a cadence and do 2 a week. But I just do 1 a week because actually that's enough. And it's a little bit of marketing. I actually added those kind of little taglines at the end of it as a kind of a joke in of itself, but actually it is a bit of marketing and a little bit of kind of, yes, this person has a vague idea what they know about. That's why data protection taglines all know something vaguely about data protection. But it is incredibly cathartic. And I think people tend to identify that both within and outside the industry. So, yeah.
If you haven't seen them, I would suggest following Simon Pillinger on LinkedIn in order to get the benefit of these skits that come up a couple of weeks. I've certainly identified and commiserated with certainly some more the helpline and the DPIAs and the one you did on the DSPT. That's our NHS security toolkit and privacy toolkit. Has undergone somewhat of some interesting revisions, Simon, and I'm sure you're best placed to comment on that.
Yeah. I've had people that have reached out to me. So I did one on like IT supplier questionnaires where you get umpteen thousand questions. I actually got reached out from someone who works for a large organization that does and facilitates some of that. He was like, I obviously can't like it, but it was really funny. But all of this comes from, there is a victim in every joke. In surrealist humor, it's always you. But the victim here is usually ourselves. It's going to be other things in the industry. And I think it's just quite a useful tool sometimes to be able to, no one likes being told they're wrong in the same way that telling someone to calm down has never ever calmed someone down. And humor, I think, is quite a good way to point out just how ridiculous some of our actions are. And it comes back, I think, to pointing at and understanding why you want to do something. And I think the problem with a lot of the things that we talk about in the sketch, around is objective perversion. So where your metric or your system for measuring or achieving the objective becomes the objective. So DSPT is a really good example of this, which is DSPT is the road to becoming compliant with the law. It isn't the objective in of itself, but it has become the objective in of itself. And the problem is there, and I'm going off on a bit of a runway, I know, is that you end up with a generation of practitioners that know how to do the DSPT, but don't necessarily know how to do the law. And that becomes problematic as time goes by.
Just for us non-Brits, what does DSPT stand for?
Sorry, yeah, you're right. So it's the Data Security and Protection Toolkit. It is the successor of the Information Governance Toolkit, and it looks at a bunch of different standards. So it is half and half cybersecurity and data protection. And a lot of the standards really relate to things that have happened over the last kind of 10 years or so where things have got messed up. So we had the WannaCry attack in 2017, which wasn't particularly targeted at healthcare organizations, but really affected some more than others. And so you have a whole standard really there looking at how you support unsupported systems. In healthcare, you have diagnostic machines that are designed to last for quite a long time because they're quite pricey. But that does mean that they often last longer than the software that's available, the operating systems are available at the time they were produced. So with WannaCry, we had stuff on XP. There's still stuff on XP. And that's because XP is a good system. But what you then do to make sure that the US, whether unsupported, just have on the D network to return from a separate internal local network.
So the toolkit is intended for data governance, data protection governance, cybersecurity governance across the organization. It's not something you would fill out for every individual patient, for example.
No, exactly. So it's an organizational level thing. And there are a couple of different categories for it as well. So you have category 1 for all the big organizations, so NHS trusts, local authorities, because this includes social care as well. And then you have not only them, you've got large IT suppliers, so anyone's got 50 members of staff and more than, I think it's £10 million of turnover. They have a slightly bigger assessment to do those two. But then you've got every other NHS supplier that processes personal data or patient data on behalf of the NHS. And if you sign NHS England's standard contractual terms, you also have to do it as well, even if you're just applying pencils to the NHS. So it's designed to be very comprehensive. The NHS is always in this kind of constant battle between actually the real world, how it operates, but also making sure that its supply chain is safeguarded. And it is almost never going to satisfy people on either end of the spectrum in terms of that balance.
It's paper-based reality.
Yeah, I would agree. You're going back to what Simon was saying about sometimes the mechanism becomes the end rather than the process.
Yeah.
It was literally yesterday, I was in a conversation about a DPIA that somebody had filled in that had no risks and no action plan. It was because the goal had become, do the DPIA. We've got a new process coming in, do a DPIA, file the DPIA. And everybody involved had forgotten that the purpose of a DPIA is to introduce controls to protect the rights and freedoms of individuals. And so the goal had become doing the DPIA rather than protecting the humans at the end. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of going back to the drawing board and reminding people that these things exist because there was supposed to be a purpose behind them, not as some compliance evidence obligation.
And that reminds me, Ralph, a lot of people may not be aware that in California, with the regulations finalized that requires a cybersecurity audit, also added a new article on risk assessments. And so the CPPA has added very specific information that they want companies and people to look at. But yes, with a focus on how do you reduce or control the risks, not to get the paper done. But like everything else that the regulations do, they're allowed to ask for copies of them at their leisure. Leisure? Y'all say leisure at their leisure.
This side of the Atlantic, we say leisure.
When Prince Harry spoke at IEPP just yesterday, I have to bring that in.
Mm-hmm.
After he gave his speech, which was about 20 minutes long, then he engaged in an interview session with our friend Joe Jones. And so Joe was on the stage talking. He said, okay, for the audience, you've got two Brits up here. So when we say privacy, we mean privacy, but we're going to say privacy. So for your translations, we're going to say privacy.
Or they could say data protection.
They could, right? They would.
But I guess that's less relevant to the Duke of Sussex, because also known as Prince Harry, because for him, it's more about the protection of his private life, which would be the right to privacy, and less the right to data protection.
For him, it was about precedent. Yeah. Yeah, it was a good speech. Yeah, tell us more, Kate. Tell us more about what the good prince said on the stage.
It was really interesting. He talked about exactly what y'all are saying, that from the time he was born, he had no privacy. His life was there for media to capture, to talk about, to pontificate on, whatever. And then when his mom died, even more, their grief was right there captured for the world. And now that he's married, he has children, he's moved to the U.S., everyone knows that whole story. He can't hide anything. And that he really hopes that, one, he can continue to advocate for privacy, but two, that the 4,000 people in the room are the ones that can help solve the problem if we understand what that problem is and how it impacts people. One of the things that he said that I think I liked the most was, people always say that it's a very complex question and it's a complex answer and there's complex technology. He says it's really very simple. Should the media have the right to exploit someone's privacy for their own purposes? No.
Probably not. At the same time, should that individual then also go to the media for everything that he wants to vent, or should he allow his friends to do that on his behalf?
Right.
Because a lot of the stories that come into the media do originate at the source.
Well, yeah, and he addressed that obliquely. That's where his life is, so that's where he engages. Doesn't do him any good not to engage then.
British press aside, the press do have a legitimate role in society in holding our public servants to account.
But let's be honest, most of the stories that come out about Prince Harry and his family have absolutely nothing to do with holding our public servants to account.
No, that's true. But just before you joined and before we started the recording, we were also
Y'all
talking...
aren't allowed to start without me.
No, we didn't start, but we were talking to Simon also about other members of the royal family and the whole Epstein scandal related to Prince Andrew. And then, obviously, you are talking about holding people to account.
Yeah. And I have to admit, UK's approach to holding Andrew accountable, we can no longer say Prince Andrew, right? To holding Andrew accountable for that and their pressure on the U.S. government to release the unfettered documents, they've handled it a lot better than we have here in the U.S. There's no doubt about that.
I think there might be some people in the UK that would probably say we might have handled it better, but probably not well enough. I think it's an interesting question with how much of how Prince Harry is now is a consequence of the psychological consequence of, and we can do some kind of COD psychology. How much of that is related to the fact that he was filmed on national television, having to walk behind the body of his mother on national TV? What does that do to someone? What, he's 10, 11 at the time?
Yeah. We had another speaker that addressed that point. She was a child star, and she talks about the lack of privacy. And I took a lot of screenshots on what she said. We can talk in more detail on another episode. But she talked about that, about children who grow up in the public eye, even if they're not making millions of dollars from acting in something. Their digital persona is being created before they even have their own physical persona, because their brain has not matured, their emotions have not matured, they don't have any context to put this in, yet their digital persona drives it with no context of where their body and their mind is. It was really interesting to hear her talk about that. They get speakers, some of them create controversy, some of them resonate with what we say. Woody Herzog spoke as well. We're the ones that can protect humanity. There was a Google executive that spoke the day before, privacy is innovation or something. I think I took a picture of it. Sounded like a big sales pitch, frankly, for Google. So you don't resonate with all the answers, but I think, Simon, you just picked up on that. What part of his life was driven by him being in the public eye?
And would it happen now? Has UK data protection law and privacy law moved on?
Yeah. Has it?
So we got the Misuse of Private Information talk, which wasn't, I think, around in Harry's early childhood. That came into mid-2000s with Naomi Campbell. And that is one of the talks that I think he has utilised quite significantly when he's been running his cases. But I think also there's a lot of it is a cultural thing. I reminded of some of the interviews with some of the kind of what is now the old Harry Potter cast from the movies that came out in the 2000s, some of the wonderful communities with Tom Felton.
Don't remind me how old I am.
I'm in my early middle ages.
The 1300s, the 1400s, the 1500s.
Right.
So the early middle ages, I think, is probably around the 9th century, 9th, 10th century. So I'm around about there. So we're looking at Athelstan, the unification of England. Anyway, so think of it in terms of United States minus 1,000. Yeah, I think things have moved on. I think you look at the cast of Harry Potter and it's really interesting. So you look at kind of Tom Felton and Daniel Radcliffe being very much feel like they're being mentored by some of the older actors, people like Alan Rickman and Nick Isaacs who played and Ralph Fiennes. But you then have, look what happened with Emma Watson and the sexualization there, which is just abhorrent. So there's progress, but boy, have we got a long way to go.
We do.
Going back to comedy, actually, one of the first times I was introduced to data protection was a comedian called the Mark Thomas Comedy Product. It's a comedian called Mark Thomas, who was a political activist here in the UK. And he did a comedy show in the late 90s where he used subject access requests to get what people have been saying about him behind closed doors in government. And he did a whole comedy sketch show based on the responses to the subject access requests, cut forward about 25 years. There's another comedian here called Joe Lycett. And Joe Lycett over in the UK, he also does comedy sketches based on, he had a parking problem for one of the councils. And he put in subject access requests and freedom of information requests in order to get the data. And again, produced a comedy show about it. So I guess my question to you, Simon, is based that people have used DSARs and FOI requests in order to produce whole comedy stage shows. When can we expect to see you in bright lights up on stage doing a full stand-up routine?
So my debut in Live at the Apollo is in the far distant future, I suspect. One of the things, I have thought about this, and writing comedy can be really difficult. Writing stand-up is hard. Writing stand-up is quite different, I think, to writing a sketch. Because with a sketch, you can re-record it as many times as you want. You will not see bloopers. And I have a couple of manual backups for where I store my video. I think I've got through something close to 100 gig of just raw video and that's the stuff that has been uploaded from my phone onto my storage devices. So it's probably about 3 times that, say probably 300 gig in the last 12 months of recorded video. That gives you an idea of how much goes into it. The writing is actually a relatively small part of it. But I did have an idea for a novel called Subject Access, which was someone who was actually getting an officer who was dealing with subject access requests and getting all these bits of information and piecing together this conspiracy. That will come at some point for sure. But I think in terms of sketches, you could do so much with freedom of information. My problem is that to get to the funny bit, I first have to get over the frustration bit.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes a little bit tricky. It takes a bit of time. It's not happening anytime soon, Rel. I'm sorry.
Simon, that reminds me of the talk shows that have people read out, I guess when it used to be tweets, read out what people would tweet about them. Sometimes it was really painful and sometimes it was funny, but they would read out live tweets with no preparation. And I can imagine getting through the hard parts of a DSAR to get to the funny parts.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I handled the DSAR. This is one of those ones that I should never have done, but hadn't realized how bad it was going to get, which was I ended up in some of the material that was searched and it was not positive. So people used to talk about being pillaged whenever I would bring them all the stuff. I was like, I didn't fair that because I thought that was quite funny. Again, I mean, learn to laugh at yourself. If someone comes up with a good pun, great. I don't care if I'm the butt of that. I'm still getting paid at the end of the day. That's fine. And I think that's that point is that, when people are, you feel a bit bruised, you just have to go, am I going to let this ruin my sleep? And you don't always get a choice about that, but you can just kind of go, that's just quite a good joke.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to deal with it.
Then you have to ask yourself, is this going to matter in 5 hours, in 5 days, in 5 years, in 50 years? Am I going to care what this person said?
Exactly. And that sometimes doesn't make you feel better in the moment, but it's that go off and do something different. Yeah.
We call it gallows humor, isn't it? Because 1 minute in data protection, you're dealing with horrific, sick, really heart-rending cases that, can deal with people's health and welfare and sexuality, and it is very tempting to go down a very dark hole if you're feeling particularly skeptical. And then in the other days, you'll find something so utterly ridiculous that you'll fall off your chair laughing. Somewhere between the two, we can find some hope.
Yeah, and I think for Simon, you come at it from a lot of perspective that I did as a nurse, and I was the daughter of a nurse who was the daughter of a nurse. And so I was brought up in emergency rooms, in medical environments, and then worked later. People would think I would have the mouth of a sailor, and I don't. But talk about gallows humor when you're working in the medical field, right? It's unbelievable what other people would believe about what you talk.
And this is the bit, night to clinician, I obviously don't get a lot of details, any kind of personal identifiable stuff, but I get reports. And there are some just odd things that happen. And you have to find the funny side of it. It's part of the coping mechanism. Having worked in the NHS, you just do, because funny things happen horrendously sometimes, but funny. And so whether that is something like I went to go and see a patient and they'd done something to their foot and basically degloved a large part of it, which basically means they'd torn quite a lot of flesh away. It was like, hey, do you want to see the bone? And before I did it, he just whipped off the thing. And I don't cope with gore. And I just went white and almost passed out. I just get out of the room. And that was really funny. The nurses thought it was hilarious. And it was.
Oh, God, probably.
But for you in the moment itself?
We started watching the show The Pit.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'd gotten so many awards and everything. So
really
we binge watched the first year, which I had no idea the format they did it in. And it was brilliant. So now we're on current seasons of the other, which my husband makes me stay up late on Thursdays to watch the new shows to come out. He's not from the medical field. He has relatives that are doctors, but not quite the same thing. So a lot of what's being said, he doesn't really understand. A different thing. He gets the context. There was one part that made me cringe. As a nurse, didn't matter, made me cringe. It was the rib spreader. To get to the heart when they cracked the ribs open, I was like, hey. And then I had to laugh, and Tim's got his eyes covered. And he's, if it's making you cringe, I don't want to see it.
What's really interesting is, anyone who hasn't read any of Adam Kay's books or seen the BBC adaptation, This Is Going to Hurt, is the journey of Adam Kay as a junior doctor, if that makes sense. My wife can't watch. Dodge won't read
No.
it because she works in that field. It's far too close for home to read.
Yeah.
But they are. Again, people are funny.
And sometimes reality is much more funnier than anything you can ever come up with.
You can't make this
Or
stuff
more
up,
extreme
is
than
what we
any
say.
scenario that you could ever write. Look at politics. That's more the field that I feel comfortable in than the healthcare sector. But if you look at what is happening, not just in the US, but in politics around the world, 5 years, 10 years ago, nobody could have told you what crazy stuff would be happening right now.
You can't make this poopy up.
No, you can't make
Right.
it up. I guess that's the same in every field.
I think a little bit differently because I think you can make it up. Because I think not reading history, you start to realize just how fantastically brilliant and bonkers human beings are. And they will make up and follow any old sort of rubbish. And you think that we're good at learning from history. No, we're not.
Apparently not.
And we're terrible at learning from history. And the problem is you end up in situations where we are, for kind of someone did fostered a lot of research on indoctrination. Essentially, people are very good at filtering out anything that kind of contradicts their worldview. And so you cannot, I think we had to be really careful about the idea that people can't do this stuff. People can and will.
Yeah.
You've seen that from recent history in the modern age. And nothing that I have studied through antiquity and the stuff that I took up as an archaeologist was 7,000 years old. Nothing from then until now has dissuaded me from the idea that humans are capable of some really screwed up stuff.
Yeah.
We're also, however, very capable of some beautiful things, and that gives me a lot of hope.
On that note, I think we should conclude this episode of The Rest is History. Sorry, the serious comedy the serious privacy podcast. I think this is. Thank you all for listening. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
Ta-ra.
Now that was serious privacy. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Blue Sky as Serious Privacy. Feel free to drop us a question or a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.